Hi, my name is Cynthia Mason. I'm a Canadian lawyer and trademark agent with the law firm of Mason PC and with our online trademarking platform, Markably. Now, as a trademark lawyer, I normally counsel against using your personal name as your main trademark. But I also appreciate that there are certain types of businesses where it just makes good sense. Off the top of my mind, I'm thinking influencers, fashion designers, interior designers, and even some lawyers and accountants and other professional service providers. And so when you are thinking of, or you have already made the decision to use your personal name as your main business brand, I created this video to share with you some thoughts on how you can actually go about protecting that brand. So you're a little bit different than, most companies. They can rely on trademark registrations to help them protect their brands. But when it comes to your own personal name, there are actually some rules in Canada that make it very difficult to get a trademark registration for your name. And I set out in this video, I kind of created a list of loopholes or exceptions to this general rule that you can't trademark the name of an individual or an individual who recently died or died within the last 30 years. So that is kind of like the umbrella rule. You can't trademark the name of an individual who is living or who has died within the last 30 years. But like I said, there are loopholes or there are exceptions to this general rule. And I'm going to set them out right now. And if you happen to qualify, if your name happens to qualify for one of these exceptions, fantastic. You're in the position where you could probably trademark your name fairly easily. If not, you may have to make a few arguments to the trademarks office to convince them as to why you qualify for an exception. Or if you don't fall into any of the exception categories, there is still an option to be able to register your name as a trademark. It's just going to take a little bit more time and a little bit more work. So the first exception is for first names. So like I said, the general rule is you can't trademark the name of an individual who is living or who has recently died. But you can trademark a first name. And so if you're Beyonce, go for it. But this rule can also extend if your full name happens to look more like two first names than a first name and a last name. So some examples I'm thinking of: Paul Ryan, two first names; Laura Lee, two first names; Tiffany Lee, two first names. And so if your name looks more like two first names together instead of a first name and a last name, you could potentially argue that it's not the name of an individual, it's more than one individual. And so you don't fall under the general rule that you can't trademark your name. So exception number two, if you have a really unusual name. Now, I'm not talking about like a name that's just a little bit strange. I mean, your name has to be so unusual that it looks like a completely made up word, not an actual person's name. And so it's a little challenging to come up with some examples of this. I did some Googling around some really unusual names, and let me say, celebrities are a great source. Celebrities' kids are a great source of really unusual names. Snowdrop, apparently a name, but it's also something that looks just a bit absurd. And so if you have an unusual name, perhaps you could make the argument that, well, no one would believe this is actually a person's name and nothing more than a name. And so you may be able to avoid the general rule that you can't trademark your name. Exception number three is a little bit more common, and we see a lot of exceptions to this, that a lot of names that can actually fall under this exception. That is if your name, and in particular your first name or even your last name, if it has an alternate meaning. So, there are a number of really common names that have dictionary meanings. So Brown, Stone, Hunter, Willow. These are all common English words that have meaning to the average person, and they just happen to be really great names too. And so if your name happens to have a common dictionary definition, you may be able to qualify for the exception to the general rule that you can't trademark your name. Now, if you have a name, maybe your name is Jane Smith, I don't know. But if you happen to have, just an average name, I mean, it's exceptional for you, but it just doesn't fall under any of these exceptions, you may still be able to trademark your name. The trick with that is that the point where you can actually trademark your name, it's not right out of the gate. So as soon as you start using it as your main brand, but if you have become so well known that your name is now no longer just a name, it's actually a brand name, then you may be able to trademark it in Canada. So this requires a certain level of fame. This is actually how most celebrities have trademarked their name in Canada. They have not only had so much publicity, but they commercialized and they really leveraged their name to sell products or entertainment services or professional sports. You really have to have a history, several years of selling something in connection with your name to be able to satisfy the requirement that your name is no longer just a person's name. It's actually a brand name. It has evolved or morphed into a brand name. So that is kind of the last resort for trademarking your name. And it's going to take a lot of work up to that point where you're going to qualify for that. But there are options in terms of trademarking your name. So if you're going to go forward with your business and really leverage your personal name as your main business brand, that doesn't mean that brand protection is not available to you. It just means it's a little bit more challenging, but there are still tools available to do it. So if you're wondering if your name may qualify for trademark protection in Canada, schedule a free consult with us. We're happy to give you our first impression and give you some advice on how you can get to the point where you have a trademark registration for your name.